Welcome to The Thing About Austen, a podcast about Jane Austen's world. I'm Zan.
And I'm Diane. And this episode, we're talking about Harriet as a natural daughter. A quick note on scheduling before we get into this episode. Our next episode after this one will be out in March, and then we will be off on a bit of a hiatus until hopefully May, possibly early June. We're just saying that because we have learned with time to be flexible with what we promise and our dates, because it feels like we have been frequently hit with the unexpected in our personal lives the last couple of years, so we're just kind of taking it as
Building
we
in
go.
a buffer.
Yes, exactly. I know for some of you who are listening, you may be thinking, hiatus, like, you know, if you haven't noticed, we basically are only putting out an episode once a month now, but it's because there's a significant amount of time that goes into each episode, and just with, again, because of other things we have going on in our work lives, you know, this is something we do on the side and that we have to fit in. And as the podcast has progressed, like the amount of work that goes into each episode in terms of the research, in terms of like putting it all together, it's kind of expanded. So it's like every episode that comes out is basically, it's like an audio research project that we are releasing to you. And if this was our full-time job, we would be able to do this more often, but it is not. So that's the situation there. So please forgive us. Please bear with us. We appreciate all of you so much. And we wish that we could put out more episodes per year, but it's just not in the cards.
Right.
But I mean, we're going to keep doing the podcast, but we just have to take this break because we both have some work commitments. And then I'm actually going to be traveling for a bit in there, taking my first big trip to England. So it's very exciting.
Seeing some Austen sites.
Yes. So if any locals have any tips or anything, you know, send us an email. So, but we will be back, but just letting everybody know that there will not be an episode out in April.
Yep. But we will be back. So we have most of our episodes for the rest of the year selected already based on your top requests. So our upcoming May episode, which will be on cottages, was actually voted on by the listeners who attended our meetup in January.
Yeah, part of what we're trying to do is, because we are putting out fewer episodes, and again, hopefully as part of that, like putting even more time and care into each episode, but because we are putting out fewer episodes, really wanting to make sure that we are covering the topics that have been our most requested. And sometimes, you know, we might have a random one that's just fun for us that we got to throw in there. But so again, these have all been, we're pulling this from, you know, when people email us, comment on things, etc., requesting topics. And we put that in a big spreadsheet. We keep track of, like, we put little hash marks so we can see, like, okay, this is a topic that's been requested 27 times. That was the entail. And so we've kind of done that with
Mm-hmm.
our topics for the next year or so. And yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so now on to this episode, which has us headed to Surrey to visit our friends at Hartfield. Emma has organized an evening entertainment for Mr. Woodhouse and invited some of the usual suspects, Mrs. and Miss Bates and Mrs. Goddard, to make up his card table. During the morning of said entertainment, Emma is sitting and contemplating this possibly long evening in front of her. You know, it's not exactly entertaining for her. She's doing this for her dad.
Yep.
When she receives a note from Mrs. Goddard requesting that she be allowed to bring a Miss Smith with her, someone Emma has never met but knows by sight. And so here, at quite nearly the beginning of the novel, are we introduced to the character of Harriet Smith when Emma is also meeting her for the first time.
So here is the intro from the text. Harriet Smith was the natural daughter of somebody. Somebody had placed her several years back at Mrs. Goddard's school, and somebody had lately raised her from the condition of scholar to that of parlor boarder. This was all that was generally known of her history. Setting up that mystery motif real early in the novel.
Yeah, and already like Emma's wheels are already turning. She's like, ooh, okay, yeah. I can come up with a backstory. Like, no backstory? No problem. I've got one for you.
I will flesh that out for you.
Oh, and we should actually say, too, that this is also one of our most requested topics, which is a reason why this was added to the queue for this year. So we hear you guys when you send those emails. When we reply back and say we are adding it to our list, we actually do that. So
yes.
So a quick heads up. In this episode, we'll be talking about historical attitudes toward children born outside of marriage. Some of the sources we reference use the word bastard. It was a common legal and social term at the time, but today it's often used as a pejorative. We'll avoid using it unless we're quoting or discussing the historical context, but just so you know, it does come up in titles and texts. And obviously, it goes without saying that attitudes and judgments around all of this, especially as regards the moral rectitude of the actual child, have changed a lot. But we're looking at this through this particular historical context from this time period.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just be aware of that as we are progressing through this episode.
So the Oxford English Dictionary defines natural in relation to a person as, quote, related genetically but not legally to his or her father, born outside of marriage, or illegitimate. And so this term likely comes from the Latin filius naturalis, which is kind of in use in around 2nd century CE.
Kate Gibson writes in her doctoral thesis, Experiences of Illegitimacy in England, 1660 to 1834, quote, illegitimacy was both a social and legal category, imposed according to definitions of marriage. So this essentially means that when someone uses the description natural child, they are using the legal construct of marriage to define someone's status, essentially the child being born outside the formal legal bonds of marriage and therefore are born of nature.
So the term filius naturalis, or natural child, was more of kind of a cultural designation. So the legal term for illegitimate children was nullius filius, literally the child of nobody. So that phrase reflects the legal reality. So illegitimate children had no recognized father in the eyes of the law, so no claim on his name, property, or inheritance.
We actually see Austen threading this needle between legal and cultural descriptions and the perceptions of illegitimacy when Emma says, quote, as to the circumstances of her birth, and she's referring to Harriet here, though in a legal sense she may be called nobody, it will not hold in common sense.
So Austen uses the proper noun nobody here to invoke that legal conception of nullius filius, while also pointing out that that isn't a logical designation. Harriet is clearly not nobody, and even her anonymous parent is overtly referred to as somebody many times when Austen is introducing her.
Before we zoom in on Harriet, let's look at the bigger picture of illegitimacy in the Georgian period. According to Gibson, parish records show that the illegitimacy ratio, that is, the proportion of births marked illegitimate, increased threefold over the 18th century. By 1800, about 6.3% of all registered births were illegitimate, and roughly 25% of first births, and those numbers are almost certainly underestimates.
According to David Selwyn, in his book Jane Austen and Children, this rise of illegitimacy was influenced by several factors, including the 1753 Marriage Act, which tightened the rules for what defined legal marriage. And we did talk about this in our episode on special licenses as well. So among the poor who had no property to secure, informal or common law marriages were common before this. But after the act, children from those unions were more likely to be recorded as illegitimate.
Yeah. So maybe not considered illegitimate by within like their community?
Or like even like a decade before, they wouldn't have been considered illegitimate.
Right. It's
just this rule has now made that a marker for them.
Like those two who live together refer to each other as husband and wife, and everybody in the community considers them as married. But illegitimacy also came with different legal parental obligations. In 1756, lawyer William Blackstone made that distinction fairly clear, writing, quote, the duties of parents to legitimate children are 1. Maintenance, 2. Protection, 3. Education. The duty of parents to bastards is only that of maintenance. That's cute.
Charming, yeah. So the role of financial maintenance made a fairly significant impact on the perception of illegitimate children. For the poor, illegitimacy was often seen as a financial burden on the parish because of the poor laws. According to Martha Bailey's article, The Marriage Law of Jane Austen's World, if the child's parents couldn't support them, the parish had to step in.
Bailey writes, under the poor laws, the overseers of the parish could obtain court orders against the father, if he could be identified and found, and the mother to support the child or face imprisonment. These payments were meant to compensate the parish, but were often given to the mother supporting her child.
So because of this implied financial strain on the parish and the public, poorer illegitimate children were unfairly associated with vice and social disorder. And so, by contrast, the illegitimate children of middling or elite families were usually privately financially supported and therefore had a bit less stigma attached to them. None of this being fair. This is just all socially constructed here.
Mm-hmm. As Gibson writes, language of the day reflected this divide, quote, often using bastard pejoratively for the poor, while natural was used for genteel illegitimates. And that language is revealing since the upper classes were astonishingly relaxed about illegitimacy. In their own way, like...
Yes. Yeah. Like it's quite loosey-goosey and arbitrary. So Ian Mortimer, in The Time Traveler's Guide to Regency Britain, paints quite a picture to demonstrate the kind of the level of laxity that was possible here. For example, Lady Harley, Countess of Oxford, had so many affairs, her children were nicknamed the Harleian Miscellany. And the daughters of Earl Spencer, Lady Georgiana and Lady Harriet, both married well, but then seduced their way through society. And Harriet even had an affair with Richard Brinsley Sheridan. Yes, Sheridan, making another cameo on our podcast. And she also bore 2 children by Earl Granville.
And what's interesting is that in some of these examples, the children born would have been considered illegitimate. The mothers might have gone off and given birth to them in secret, placed them elsewhere. But in some cases, they were considered legitimate if their mother's husband claimed them and was like, yeah, these are my kids. So it might have been the kind of thing where it's an open secret, like everybody knows, but they are legally considered legitimate in those situations.
Yeah.
So among the elite, illegitimacy was often an open secret, just like we were saying, and it was shrugged off as part of the glittering chaos of aristocratic life. Like, you got your heir and your spare, and now we're just kind of doing what we do. And public prejudice was less common among elites, at least during this time period, right? Things start to change when we're getting into later Victorian era.
Yeah.
But open ostracism was considered vulgar. Sometimes illegitimate children were still othered and subject to curiosity, but depending on how powerful and wealthy your parents were and how much support they were willing to throw behind you, like, your situation was probably not too bad.
Yeah. For illegitimate children from the middling class, like Harriet, discrimination was more subtle. It would be things like gossip about you, social distance from someone, and questions about their background. And we definitely see this in Austen's novel. We're particularly looking at you, Mr. and Mrs. Elton. Just,
And so this is also why marriage for illegitimate children was tricky. As Gibson explains, quote, one of the primary objections to marrying illegitimate children was that their background was a mystery, which again is probably why if you were the illegitimate child of a duke, everyone's like, well, you're illegitimate, but we also know that your dad is a duke or your mom is a duchess, right? So it's like, we can probably still put together a pretty good match for you, especially if there's enough money involved.
Yeah. And Mr. Knightley kind of points out this kind of the ramifications of not knowing parentage. So he says this in the novel. Men of family would not be very fond of connecting themselves with a girl of such obscurity, and most prudent men would be afraid of the inconvenience and disgrace they might be involved in when the mystery of her parentage came to be revealed. So it's not maybe our most flattering moment for Mr. Knightley, but it is a very realistic concern if you aren't aware of who the parents are for this child.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's very much speaking in realities, and especially speaking in the reality of the fact that he seems to be more aware of Mr. Elton's character and what he would be looking for in a wife than what Emma seems to think that Mr. Elton would be looking for in a wife.
Yes. Yeah, he's very much so trying to be like, okay, Emma, reel it back in.
Right.
Reel it back in. And so he does have to kind of sometimes deliver the hard truths, and this is him doing that.
So we've talked about the poor laws and how they apply to illegitimate children of the poor, but Harriet's situation is different since she's clearly not a parish case. Emma says, her allowance is very liberal. Nothing has ever been grudged for her improvement or comfort. So this tells us Harriet is privately supported.
Right. And so legally, Harriet's father owes her financial support, but not protection, not name, not education. So the fact that she's at Mrs. Goddard's boarding school suggests her father is going beyond the bare minimum legally that's required of him. And yet he's doing so with anonymity, which was fairly common with the middle class.
Gibson points out that, quote, many fathers paid maintenance but avoided or performed only at a distance. This was due to a desire for secrecy. Secrecy was not the automatic reaction, but was most common among the middling sorts.
So Gibson also provides a really effective example of this. So Silas Neville, an aspiring country gentleman and provincial physician in the late 1770s, went to extraordinary lengths to keep his illegitimate children secret. He sent his mistress over 100 miles away to give birth, baptized the children under false names, and later placed his surviving daughter, named Sarah Reed, in a boarding school.
And sometimes fathers used proxies to maintain secrecy. Gibson explains, quote, "These were usually close friends who maintained physical contact with the child and acted as middlemen to preserve secrecy." So we got another example from our pal, Richard Brinsley Sheridan, who just keeps popping up.
Can't escape him.
So he had a child with a governess and arranged for his two friends, Georgina Cavendish and Henrietta Ponsonby, to arrange for this governess, Caroline, to go abroad, deliver the baby, and then they adopted the baby, who basically was just sort of like raised at Devonshire House as sort of like a little bit of like a Fanny Price situation, sort of like that in between, but they saw that she was educated, like sent her to school and married her off and all that. And apparently she had grown up kind of assuming that one of these two sisters, like these aristocratic sisters, were her mother.
Her mother. Mm-hmm.
Because again, like this is the kind of thing that would have been, you might have been trying to go for secrecy, but again, if you were of a certain class, you could also do the whole like, oh, this is my niece, quote, this is my,
yes,
this is
nudge.
this is my ward, like whatever. So there was quite a bit of that going on as well. Or having like, your parents adopt the child and you having some kind of contact, etc. So
yeah.
I mean, again, there's so many different permutations and so many examples of, it's one of those things that kind of tricky to talk about because we're sort of trying to lay out, this is sort of how things work during this time period, but obviously it's very different between the classes. And then even within a certain class, there's exceptions, right, to everything. So
yeah. Yeah, context is always going to inform how this child is perceived, how they are treated, what their options are.
Yeah.
So in the example that we talked about before with Neville, he relied on his close friends to actually pay maintenance and check on his daughter's welfare while he traveled abroad. And so in one letter, he even instructed his friend that his child, quote, must pass for a daughter of an officer, a friend of yours now abroad. So like even he's kind of starting to invent a backstory for his own child.
It's like, oh yeah, I heard that she was actually so-and-so's kid. Like, what? Like, okay, dude.
Yeah.
So when we think about Harriet in this context, the pattern makes sense. She has a comfortable allowance, a genteel education, and yet no knowledge of who her parents are.
And so this really leads us into the education experience for illegitimate children, since this is one of the major parts of Harriet's narrative that we do know. So education for illegitimate children often looked different from that of their legitimate peers, and class again played a big role. So Gibson notes that many parents, especially in the middling and elite ranks, invested in their illegitimate children's education because they believed those children could integrate into public life at a similar social status.
For boys, the differences were subtle. Illegitimate sons started school at about the same age as legitimate sons, around 9 or 10, but they often attended different schools than their legitimate siblings or cousins.
And these sons were also less likely to go to Oxford or Cambridge. And when they did attend university, it was usually for very practical reasons. According to Gibson, 61% of illegitimate children who went on to higher education entered the clergy, law, or civil service, compared to 35% of legitimate sons.
Who are presumably, more likely to inherit the family property.
Precisely.
The illegitimate sons, they have to have some sort of a profession, right? Because they have to earn a living. For girls, the differences were more pronounced. Elite legitimate daughters were usually taught at home, often by a governess, and might attend boarding school for a short time before being launched into society by female relatives. Illegitimate daughters, by contrast, went to school much younger and stayed much longer.
So Gibson again provides some examples, and she points out that Barbara Thomas and Georgina Walpole, both illegitimate daughters of peers, entered school at 6 or 7 and stayed until they were 18. And in our case with Neville and his daughter, she started boarding school at the age of 5 and remained until she was in her early 20s.
Boarding schools also served a practical purpose. They provided a stable upbringing, socialization, and importantly, the appearance of legitimacy. These schools didn't always hide awkward family circumstances. In Harriet's case, we can see that everyone in town knows her backstory. But illegitimate children could be enrolled as orphans, and fathers or trustees often posed as guardians. Schools colluded in this discretion, but oftentimes had reputations for treating illegitimate children quite well. Again, if the fees are being paid, the children will be treated well.
Yeah. Or, this school is particularly good at hiding what you don't want known, basically. So again, with Neville and his example, he paid his daughter's fees while maintaining the appearance as her mother's employer. That was his connection to her. It's like, oh yeah, I just happened to pay your mom. And in another example from Gibson, Caroline Metcalfe was kept secret from her father, Lord Pembroke's legitimate family, raised by a foster family and then sent to Newcastle boarding school. And her father spared no expenses. She got to go to concerts, plays, had beautiful gowns, drawing lessons, etc. And so the boarding school allowed her to appear respectable and eventually marry very well.
Not every illegitimate daughter was destined for a glittering marriage, though. Metcalfe was the daughter of a titled gentleman. So again, like we were saying earlier, the higher up you were in terms of who you were born to, that definitely made a difference for your prospects. Illegitimate daughters from more middle-class parents were often educated with an eye toward employment, teaching, governess work, or other genteel occupations.
But the key point is that boarding schools were a well-known solution for families who wanted to provide for their illegitimate daughters while maintaining secrecy. So when we look at Harriet, her situation fits this larger pattern of education for illegitimate daughters, especially if we return to the passage that we referenced at the top of the episode.
First, we learn that Harriet has been at Mrs. Goddard's for a long time. She was placed there several years back, so she entered boarding school fairly young. She is also at the slightly older end of boarding school age at 17.
And then there's the fact that she's been, quote, raised from her condition of scholar to that of parlor boarder. A parlor boarder was a student who paid extra for privileges, better accommodations, more genteel treatment, and often closer association with the schoolmistress and her family. So it was a way to signal status within the school.
So Harriet's shift from ordinary scholar to parlor boarder tells us first that someone, almost certainly her father, has recently increased her allowance. Second, this elevates Harriet's social position and prolongs her time at school. Instead of finishing her education and leaving, she's staying on in a semi-social role, which was common for illegitimate girls whose families wanted to maintain their genteel polish without bringing them home. It's like, you're not welcome here with the rest of the family, but we do want to take care of you and let you sort of maintain the social polish.
Yeah, and give you as many options to interact in a social context as possible.
And hopefully to find a husband.
To find a husband, yes. So Harriet's allowance and her extended stay at Mrs. Goddard's suggest that her father hopes that she will marry well, or at least respectably. And she's in the best possible social position that he's willing or able to provide for at this point.
Without actually openly acknowledging her.
Right. Exactly.
And we're not trying to give Harriet's dad a pass, but in this particular situation, he isn't like a duke. So him openly acknowledging her and taking her around town and be like, this is my illegitimate daughter, that actually wouldn't improve her prospects. So
yeah. Austen actually says that he was very decent for concealing his identity. Like, she actually includes that. And I think that that's a real heavy social cue.
So let's turn to how Austen treats Harriet as a character in the broader novel. One of the most fascinating elements of the novel is how Emma seemingly adopts Harriet and creates an entire plot that imagines Harriet as part of the foundling narrative that was popular in the late 18th century. Again, imagination is not something that Emma is in any shortage of. Like, she's got that covered.
Yes. Harriet doesn't have a backstory. I've got this covered. So a foundling was a very prominent literary or cultural term during this period, and it usually described a child with mysterious or unknown parentage. Often they were abandoned or raised by strangers. As Lisa Sunshine explains in her book Bastards and Foundlings, Illegitimacy in 18th Century England, in fiction, foundlings were usually misplaced, born to respectable or aristocratic parents, and later found through dramatic recognition scenes. I'm obviously thinking of importance of being earnest in being found in a handbag, you know?
Yes. This trope allowed authors to explore themes of virtue, identity, and social mobility without challenging the moral order. The heroine's legitimacy was always restored by the end and rewarded with a brilliant marriage. Think of novels like Frances Burney's Evelina or Maria Edgeworth's Belinda. And we know that Austen was a fan of both of those authors, so.
Right, yeah. Yeah, she has some source material here. And Emma seems to create this fantasy for Harriet. So early in the novel, she tells Harriet, quote, "There can be no doubt of your being a gentleman's daughter, and you must support your claim to that station by everything within your own power." So Emma is using gentleman here to mean someone who does not have to work in trade for their money. And so she's like, believe that this is your story and live it, manifest this.
The power of positive thinking, okay?
Yes.
So Emma sees Harriet's unknown parentage as an opportunity for social mobility. And Sunshine argues that her matchmaking schemes echo those novels where benevolent patrons adopt a foundling and launch her into society before finding out that, again, she's like the daughter of an earl or something.
Yes.
And not only the daughter of an earl, but the
legitimate.
Yes.
The legitimate daughter of a titled person. Mm-hmm. Yes. In her doctoral thesis, Narrative Patterns of Illegitimacy and Infanticide in the 19th Century Novel, Caroline Emery adds to Sunshine's reading of Harriet as a foundling when she points out that Harriet encourages Robert Martin to read Anne Radcliffe's novel Romance of the Forests, a classic foundling romance.
But Austen does something interesting with this foundling motif in Emma. Unlike most earlier foundling novels, Harriet is never revealed to be legitimate or aristocratic. Sunshine writes, quote, Austen departs from the conventional foundling narrative. Harriet stays a tradesman's illegitimate daughter, yet marries well and achieves happiness.
And according to Sunshine, Austen signals this shift in a really clever way when Harriet goes to stay with the Knightleys in London. They live in Brunswick Square, which is an area associated with the London Foundling Hospital. So Sunshine argues that this is Austen's reality check for the foundling narrative. Harriet's story ends not with a dazzling aristocratic marriage, but with what she calls a common sense match to Robert Martin.
Putting it a different way, Emery writes, although Emma might not realize it, she has managed to participate in a foundling romance where the heroine can remain illegitimate and still achieve a happy ending.
So in wrapping up this discussion of Harriet's role in the narrative, we wanted to compare Harriet's marriage in the novel with the realities of illegitimate daughters of her social class during the early part of the 19th century.
Malcolm Bradbury, in his article, Jane Austen's Emma, explains, quote, Harriet's illegitimacy means that she can be judged very differently by different people, and each of them associates her with a rank that indicates the nature of their judgment. Emma imagines her as a future aristocrat. Knightley sees her as suited to Robert Martin. Both are pulling from different perceptions of illegitimacy.
So one of the clearest statements about Harriet's position, again, comes from Mr. Knightley, again, because he's kind of our realist in the situation. So he says, what are Harriet Smith's claims, either of birth, nature, or education, to any connection higher than Robert Martin? She is the natural daughter of nobody knows whom, with probably no settled provision at all, and certainly no respectable relations. She is known only as parlor boarder at a common school. He then points out to Emma that it's laughable to call it, quote, a degradation to illegitimacy and ignorance to be married to a respectable, intelligent gentleman farmer.
I mean, he's kind of a buzzkill, you know?
She's like, hey, I've got this whole foundling narrative thing going on, and you are really stepping on my creativity.
Oh, yeah. So Knightley's bluntness might sound harsh, but it reflects the social conservatism of the time. And he's also responding to the realities of Robert Martin's social position. That, especially that last line, a degradation to illegitimacy and ignorance. It's like, okay, retract the clause, Knightley. You don't need to be so mean to Harriet. But, his to be married to a respectable, intelligent gentleman farmer, for him, this is less about Harriet and more about, how dare you put down my bro over here?
My bro, exactly. This guy is under my wing, and
it's really the two of them both have their
adopted pet project.
Yeah. And they're sort of competing over it. Yeah. And really, if you're playing dolls, just make the two of them kiss. Come on.
Yep, pretty much.
That's what they want to do. So Robert Martin isn't a squire or a member of the landed gentry, but he's far from a peasant. Mortimer describes Regency farmers as a diverse group, with some, like Martin, as wealthy and upwardly mobile, leasing large farms and even buying estates.
And gentlemen farmers were also often well-off, educated, and eager to display the trappings of gentility.
Yeah, they have an upper maid. They have 2 parlors.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So Mortimer writes, while some people will appreciate these signs of gentility, their social superiors will insist that such marks of grace are pretentious and shallow. Now, Emma herself has a moment or two of this attitude. But for others, especially those from the middling class, these farmers they represented aspirational wealth. Mortimer writes that those below them, quote, can only dream of marrying the sons and daughters of such upwardly mobile farmers.
Yeah, and definitely the kind of match that Harriet's father is happy for her to have, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when Harriet's parentage is revealed and we learn that her father is a tradesman who has always provided for her generously, Robert Martin looks like a solid match. For an illegitimate daughter of a tradesman, marrying a respectable farmer offered stability, social respectability, and even a touch of upward mobility.
Yeah. And it is worth noting in this moment, too, what Austen doesn't tell us. There's no mention of Harriet's mother anywhere in the novel. It gives us no concrete clues, and it seems the novel at least seems more interested in Harriet's social position rather than her specific parentage. And that silence reflects kind of a cultural reality that illegitimacy was often managed quietly, with as little public acknowledgement as possible.
And we do want to acknowledge the reading from some scholars that you may come across that Harriet might be Miss Bates's daughter. The main source of this reading comes from the fact that Miss Bates goes by Hetty, which is a diminutive of Harriet, and that it was also a very common thing for a daughter to be named after her mother. So that's kind of the idea around that. But also, it must be said that Harriet was a very common name during this time period, along with Henrietta, which Hetty was also a diminutive of. And if Austen was intending this as sort of a parentage Easter egg, she really doesn't do much else with it. So again, that is a theory out there that we wanted to mention, and we will leave that for individual listeners to decide for themselves.
Also, when Harriet's parentage is revealed, Austen never makes Harriet the butt of a joke or treats her as a less developed or meaningful character because of her illegitimacy. If anything, it seems like Austen is kind of poking at the society that makes these distinctions or judgments about a person based on their parents' decisions. So, as Selwyn writes, it is significant that, quote, the irony of Harriet's parentage is directed at society, and perhaps a little at Emma, but it is certainly not at the expense of Harriet herself.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that good Robert Martin does not care even a tiny little bit.
No, they're in love, man.
Well, and it's not even just, like, he doesn't care.
Nobody cares. Yeah.
Yeah, his sisters don't care. His mom doesn't care. Like, everybody in his family is so on board for Harriet. And it's like, Emma, like, even if you had managed to get Mr. Elton to marry Harriet, how would she have been received by his broader family? You know, like, we don't know anything about his family, but...
Yeah, that was a very safe place for her to land, you know, in the first place. Yeah.
And Emery sums it up perfectly. Quote, Harriet's originality as a character derives not only from her sustained presence in the text, but also, somewhat paradoxically, from the sheer normality of her experience. She doesn't become a duchess or marry Mr. Knightley, but she does exactly what many middling illegitimate daughters did, marry within her class with financial support from her father.
And more than that, it has an actual happily ever after, right?
Yes. And we know from the text that, you know, the text tells us no objection was raised on the father's side. The young man was treated liberally. It was all as it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the father supports this. Robert is on board, and there's even extra money, it sounds like, with this, that there's a settlement. You know, like, everybody is happy about this situation. Okay, so before we wrap up, let's look at another notable example of where natural daughter shows up elsewhere in Austen. So in Sense and Sensibility, we have Eliza Williams, who is Colonel Brandon's ward. Mrs. Jennings says to Eleanor, quote, she is a relation of the Colonel's, my dear, a very near relation. We will not say how near, for fear of shocking the young ladies. And then she, like, whispers, probably loudly, to Eleanor, she's his natural daughter.
She is his Yeah, that's...
Exactly.
I love Mrs. Jennings. She's my favorite. Of course, Mrs. Jennings is wrong. Eliza isn't Brandon's daughter, but as Selwyn points out, quote, the little knot of illegitimacy in the novel is tightly drawn. Not only is Eliza herself illegitimate, having been the offspring of her mother's first guilty connection, but she is widely spoken of, particularly by Mrs. Jennings, as the Colonel's natural daughter. And we have to say here, we are really going off of the text, as it is explained to us from Colonel Brandon, that Eliza is not his daughter. But as with the Miss Bates Harriet connection, there are some scholars who posit the possibility that Eliza is in fact Colonel Brandon's daughter. So we just wanted to mention that. We're not working under that supposition here, but
we're going off of, this is what the text tells us.
Yes.
So Mrs. Jennings, when she's making this claim, even if she's wrong, there are at least understandable reasons why she's making this connection. So, as we've discussed, there were lots of men who supported their illegitimate children under secrecy and with the nominal role of being, of being the guardian to a ward. And so her financial support is coming from Brandon, And so this is probably fueling the rumor that Eliza is his daughter, since it would have been a very common practice during the period.
Right. Mrs. Jennings is not just, while she does have some Emma-like capabilities for making things up, she also has a great imagination. This is nowhere outside the realm of possibility. Like, this is a very kind of plausible situation for her to sort of assume, well, obviously she's his daughter, and we all just kind of like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, it's your ward.
Yes. Well, especially because it's her character, too, to also be like, give me all the gossip. I want that. And so, like, she probably has, like, this whole, like, secret register of all the illegitimate children, you know, she would eat up that narrative, basically.
If there is something to know, Mrs. Jennings is going to know it. And if there are things that are not to be known, she will make them up, or, you know, she will find a way.
Her hair is so big because it's full of secrets.
1,000%. Although they're not really secrets because she tells them to everybody she knows.
Right. Full of open secrets. So on this issue of illegitimacy, it also comes up in a lot of historical romance, mysteries, and the like. You don't often see an illegitimate female main character, but there are quite a few books that feature an illegitimate male main character or love interest.
Yeah, and I think I'm guessing the reason why authors go that route is because, especially if you're writing historical, right, it's easier to have the man like sort of have like an active career, or sort of like quote unquote make something of himself regardless of the circumstances of his birth. So yeah, you don't see that often with a female main character, but a lot of romances, historical mysteries, and the like, where he is, you know, the main male character is illegitimate, and he's like, you know, he's a Bow Street runner or a retired army officer turned private inquiry agent. He might have a supportive relationship with his father and sort of be one of those openly acknowledged children.
Right.
Or possibly be seeking approval from said father, who's definitely a duke or something. And he may or may not have a contentious relationship with his legitimate brother. Like, they might be very
optional, you know?
That's optional. They might be very, very close, or it might be one of those, like, we hate each other. You know, it could go either way.
Right. Yeah. But it makes for good fiction, which Emma already knows.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. So, like, she's not wrong. Common in books of her time, and still used quite a bit in books that are set in this period that are coming out now.
Absolutely.
And I've read all of them.
You're like, give me more. It's great. Bring on that trope.
Well, if you have any thoughts on anything from this episode, you can find us on our website, thethingaboutausten.com, and email us at thethingaboutausten@gmail.com. You can also still find us on Instagram at thethingaboutausten, but as we've been telling people, definitely the website or email, those are the best ways to get in touch with us. And you can check out our merch for the podcast on Redbubble. Go to aboutausten.redbubble.com. And a quick shout out to everyone who has taken the time to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Tam Jam B says, a podcast doing a deep dive on Austen minutia. How could I say no? I flatter myself that I'm a pretty experienced Austen fan, so I didn't expect to learn much new stuff. But was I ever wrong? Just a few episodes in, I learned that Box Hill is a real place. Mind blown. So now I have both a new favorite podcast and a new bucket list item. I really need to visit Box Hill in person and find an old lady to be rude to. Thank you, ladies. Keep up the great work. You know, normally we just take like a line or two out of a review to read it, but we had to read that entire thing.
The punchline, you know, you needed it.
You needed the whole setup.
Please give us the update when you have accomplished that box, that item.
And Miss Muscles says, bless you for making my rainy weekend so fulfilling. These conversations are exactly the ones I want to be having basically all the time. What a delight. Thank you.
Aw, thank you. So stay tuned for next episode when we'll be talking about Mrs. Bates knitting with our guest, Eleanor Gilchrist.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.